Hello, I'm author Carrie Vaughn, and I'd like to tell you about my next book, Kitty's Mixtape. Will be coming out from Tachyon Publications in October 2020. It collects previously published short stories set in my best-selling Kitty Norville series, but it also includes 4 brand new, never-before-seen stories, and I'd like to read to you from one of those. This is called Kitty Walks On By and Calls Your Name. Ben parked and we sat in the car for what seemed like a very long time, not saying anything, staring grimly ahead as if we were about to go into battle. "It's not too late to back out of this," he said finally. "There's nothing in the universe that says you have to go to your high school class reunion." 10 years. With everything that had happened to me over the last 10 years, it seemed like a century ought to have passed. On the other hand, I could still remember what it felt like to walk down those stinky school halls and worry about grades and graduation and the rest of it. Ben was right. I didn't need to do this. I didn't need to be here, and I certainly didn't need to drag him along. He was wearing a suit and tie, his courtroom best, a fresh shave and brushed hair, all the polish, and not his meeting clients at the county jail at 2 a.m. scruff, which meant he was taking this seriously. I was in a very mature cocktail dress, black with a red belt and a style that showed off my figure. My blonde hair was up, I'd put on makeup. Retro elegance. Looking in the mirror before we'd left home made me think I ought to dress up more often. Did I really want to do this? We could start the car back up and turn around right now. I wouldn't even have known the reunion was happening except Sadie Martinez sent me an email. She'd reached out and practically begged me. She didn't want to be here alone. Sadie and I had been best friends, study partners, double dating to prom, all of it. And I hadn't talked to her since my junior year of college, because I hadn't talked to anyone since junior year of college. The year I'd been attacked by a werewolf and transformed into something that didn't normally think much about high school class reunions. My life fell into 2 parts, before I was turned into a werewolf and after. This was all before. It happened to someone else. I'd walk through these hotel ballroom doors and wouldn't know anyone, and the ones I did know would be angry that I'd stopped talking to them. If they didn't run screaming because I was a monster. Because I wasn't just a werewolf. I hosted a talk radio advice show on the supernatural and had been caught shapeshifting on national television. I was a famous werewolf. Part of why we wanted to turn around was the off chance someone might have brought a gun with silver bullets, thinking they'd be doing the world a favor. But I felt like I owed it to Sadie after all these years I'd dropped out of sight. "Did you go to your high school reunion?" I asked. Ben was enough older than me. His 10-year reunion had happened before I met him a few years ago. "Oh, hell no," he said. "I couldn't get out of there fast enough." "You weren't even a little bit curious about what happened to people?" "Nope," he grinned. "My dad was in prison by then. I had no interest in explaining all that to that crowd." I was suddenly daunted. I was going to have to explain the werewolf thing over and over again. "Maybe I don't want to do this," I murmured. "Okay," Ben said, "just to get it out in the open, why are we doing this?" "Because I'm super curious, and this is the kind of thing that only happens once, and if I miss it, I'll always wonder." "All good reasons. Right. Let's go. We can always ditch if things go sideways." "But they're not going to go sideways. It's a high school reunion. What could possibly go wrong?" He gave me a scowling look. Don't ever ask what could go wrong. I knew that lesson. We left the warm, late evening June air and entered the excessive air conditioning of the hotel ballroom lobby. A few people, also in suits and cocktail hour finery, mingled, talking in groups. There was nervous laughter. I didn't recognize anyone, not right away. I looked for Sadie with a sudden spike of fear that I wouldn't recognize her either. Ben guided me toward a table where a couple of unassuming soccer mom types were standing guard over rows of name tag stickers. They seemed familiar. One was brunette, average build, might have been a cheerleader. The other tanned, dark-haired, also a cheerleader? Maybe we had algebra together? We found our stickers, and the women's smiles remained relentlessly cheerful. Maybe they didn't recognize me either. This had been a pretty big high school. So now what? Just keep wandering around until I recognize someone? This wasn't how high school reunions looked in the movies, where the bitchy popular girls came back as stuck-up suburban housewives, the jocks were out-of-shape used car salesmen, and the oppressed nerds were billionaire tech geniuses, and the people who were most unhappy had found their way, and the people who were bullies got their comeuppance. High school reunion, a chance to right old wrongs and take revenge on the cool kids. But that wasn't how this looked at all. Everyone was scanning faces, walking past each other like we were at some kind of statue gallery, searching for signs of the people we were years ago, searching for familiarity. So many of the men, I had to shave 20 pounds off them before they looked familiar. And it wasn't that they had gotten fat, but that they had filled out. They weren't scrawny boys anymore. Names hovered on the tip of my tongue. I should have looked in the yearbook for a refresher before coming here. We were like deer in the headlights, amazed that any of us had survived at all. Because enough time had passed to make us realize that nobody in high school thought they were cool. They just acted out on their worst insecurities and struggled to get through in one piece. High school felt so big while we were living it, but the percentage of our lives those years represented got smaller and smaller as time went on. What was an entire quarter of our lives 10 years ago now was what? 14%? And in 10 more years it would be 10%? And the beat goes on. You look like you're about to start crying, Ben said. I think I'm sad. Let's go find you a glass of wine. Kitty! I turned to the call coming from down the foyer. A woman rushed towards me. She had honey brown hair in a bob and was stout and confident in a cute black dress and loud earrings. Sadie hadn't changed a bit, except neither one of us had the confidence and poise for slinky cocktail dresses back in high school. Now look at us, like we were grown-ups or something. She ran up to me. In wolf language, this, a fellow predator coming at me with arms outstretched, was an attack. But I was a civilized werewolf, and she was a friend. And I was just so happy that I recognized her, and she knew me. And this right here made me glad I came. I reached for and accepted the enthusiastic hug. A little of the tension I'd been feeling slipped away. I've missed you, she said into my hair, holding tight. I'm sorry I lost touch, I murmured. You look really good. So do you. We separated and beamed at each other in admiration. How are you? What have you been doing? We have so much to talk about. She glanced appraisingly at Ben. And you are? Sadie, this is Ben. I presented them to each other. Nice to meet you, Ben said neutrally. She purred. Do you want to go get a glass of wine or something? Oh, God, yes. We hooked arms and stalked into the ballroom. Ben followed, amused. After acquiring wine and staking out territory at one of the white cloth-draped tables, we caught up. Sadie had gone to school at Northwestern, then law school, returned to Denver to work for the legal department of an environmental nonprofit, which was exactly the kind of thing she'd always said she'd do, if not exactly the way she thought. She'd had dreams of writing Greenpeace zodiacs to save the whales, which I was just as glad she never did. This was safer. She and Ben instantly bonded over law school anecdotes and seemed relieved that their areas of expertise were so far apart they'd never had to meet professionally. As for me, I didn't have to explain much because Sadie said she listened to my show sometimes. As soon as I'd gotten a website with a contact form, she'd thought about sending me a note. The reunion finally prompted her to do it. I couldn't explain why I haven't ever reached out to her. I had a rough couple of years there, I said. And then I figured you'd be too angry to want to hear from me. It sounded stupid now, and her frown of reprimand told me yes, it was stupid. So, she said, idly running a painted nail around the base of her wine glass, you talked to Jessi at all? Jessi Kramer. Another set of memories crashed over me. Part of the old life again. I shook my head. I haven't talked to him since graduation. Ah, she said suggestively. Ben caught the tone. And who is Jessi? Just a guy, I said, pretty sure I was blushing. I didn't want to talk about this. Ben arched a brow. Her boyfriend, senior year. Oh, really? Ben's brows went up. Any chance I'll get to meet this guy? I doubt it, I said quickly. He moved away right after graduation. Sadie leaned in. They broke up right in the middle of prom. It was amazing. You've never told me any of this, Ben said admiringly. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it much until now. It hadn't been very relevant to the post-werewolf life. He won't come to this, I said, almost pleading with Sadie to agree with me. She shrugged expansively. So, Sadie, you have any embarrassing pictures of Kitty I should know about? Ben asked. I blanched. We don't really need to go looking. She grinned. They've got some old yearbooks at the front table if we want to go check. The place filled up, and I recognized more and more people, and somehow we all looked completely different than we had, and we hadn't changed a bit, both at the same time. Hi, Kitty, an upbeat woman with her dark hair in a ponytail wearing a silky pantsuit came up to me. I don't know if you remember me. Amanda, we worked on yearbook together. I accepted a quick hug. We did the 1-minute update of the last 10 years of our lives, and I repeated the same exchange with a dozen other people. Wolf slowly settled. These weren't strangers. We weren't in danger, even though this definitely didn't feel like our territory. It helped that Ben was looking out for us. He patiently let himself be introduced over and over. This is my husband, Ben. And what do you do, Ben? Lawyer, criminal defense. Yeah, that got a couple of stares. And a raised eyebrow when one of the old marching band crowd asked him for a business card. You were on yearbook, Ben asked, incredulous. Yep. I had no idea. I'm learning all kinds of things about you. I suppose you were all over Spirit Week and went to all the football games. I was practically normal back in the day. Before, he said. Yeah, before. He squeezed my hand and kissed my cheek. Sadie, a tough-looking guy with an expensive-looking haircut and dark jacket, came up to our table, and Sadie's eyes widened. Trevor? Trevor Ames? He'd changed. He hadn't just put on that filling-out weight that everyone else had. He'd put on muscle and moved with a practiced efficiency. He was a fighter. Back in school, he'd been one of our crowd, Sadie and Jessi and me and the rest of us who weren't cool enough to be in the cool crowd but weren't goth or jocks or nerds enough to be in any other clique, so we just made our own. He joined the Army right after graduation and was another one I'd completely lost track of when I lost track of everybody. He's got a gun under that jacket, Ben whispered in my ear. I looked sharply at him. Silver bullets? Can't tell. He smiled wryly as Sadie insisted on hugging him. They separated, and then he looked right at me, a challenging stare, and his smile thinned. Kitty, you really are a werewolf. You saw the YouTube video just like everyone else, I said dryly. He looked me up and down. I could just tell. He looked Ben up and down, in the same way, meaning he'd spotted both of us. We usually didn't tell people about Ben being a werewolf, too. You could spot a werewolf just by looking, if you knew what to look for. This meant Trevor knew what to look for. And how, exactly. Is that a problem? I asked. No, he said. No, it isn't. I wondered, what would make it a problem? This is making me so happy, Sadie said, beaming. All of us together again. Do you know if Jessi's coming? Trevor asked me. I don't, I said. I kind of lost touch with everybody. I figured if anyone knew. He trailed off and shrugged. Ben said brightly, I really want to meet Jessi. I hope he shows up. He's not going to show up, I said. The guy who'd been class president went to a podium at the front of the room and tapped on the microphone, which was indeed on and screeched in disapproval. I winced. What had that poor mic ever done to him? He gave a speech about how happy he was, how great it was to see everyone, and how happy he was again, and so on. And then he announced that there were prizes. Prizes? Shouldn't we all get a prize just for being here? With the speeches over, the dancing began. The DJ started the first set with Smash Mouth's All-Star. So, it was going to be like that, was it? So, Ben asked, why'd you break up with this Jessi guy? I narrowed my gaze. Is this going to be a problem, you being jealous of a guy I dated 10 years ago? Just curious. He was going away to Boston for college. He made noises about trying to stay together, but it was just noise. We'd have been setting ourselves up to fail. It might have worked out. And if it had, we wouldn't be here, I said. If Jessi and I had managed to stick together and make it work, my life would be so completely different I had trouble fathoming it. For one thing, I wouldn't be a werewolf. Which sounded good until also realizing it meant I wouldn't have my radio show, and I wouldn't have Ben. I tried to avoid regretting pretty much anything. Regret had no boundaries once it started. Trevor was standing a little apart from the table, watching the crowd, noting every face, turning to the doorways every time someone entered or left. You look like a hunter on the prowl, I said. He chuckled. Yeah, I suppose you'd know all about that. What's your story? You joined the Army and then... He shrugged. Here and there, this and that. It's not interesting. Next up on the set list, tub thumping. That got a couple of people out on the dance floor for some half-hearted bouncing. Ben said preemptively, I'm not dancing. That's my line in the sand. I will not ask you to dance, I promise, I said. Suddenly, his chin tipped up, his nose flaring, his brow furrowed, and attention tightened his shoulders. An intrusive smell caught his attention. I took a breath to find the scent he'd spotted. A body moving into the ballroom, chilled, corpse-like, but not rotting, cold with death, but still alive. A vampire. We both turned to the man who had just entered the ballroom. Svelte, wearing a dark shirt and gray slacks, casual and stylish, his hair slicked back. Everyone was eyeing him. He looked good. Of course he did. It was how vampires attracted prey. I gasped and slapped my hand over my mouth, astonished because it finally clicked and I recognized him. Jessi Kramer, my high school sweetheart, broke up at prom drama ex-boyfriend, was a vampire. And you'll have to wait to find out what happens next. It'll be coming out in October. Once again, Kitty's mixtape from Tachyon Publications. Thank you all for listening and for spending time with me. Until next time, take care, stay safe.